So I just hit 20,000 subscribers on my YouTube channel. Thank you. And I was racking my brain about what I should do to celebrate this little milestone. I could have done a Q&A, I could have done something else, but I decided to read Twilight and talk about it. I've never read Twilight before, but I have seen all of the films once each, and they introduced me to Michael Sheen, one of my favourite people in the whole wide world. And since it's spooky season, it's October, it's vampire time, I thought, let's read Twilight. It'll be fun. It wasn't fun. And you know what? I challenged myself to read this book and talk about it, but I didn't actually finish it. It is 400 pages long, and I read 100 of those pages. I have read a quarter of Twilight, and the reason I stopped, the reason I could not continue, is not because it's bad, but because it's boring. I am now wondering why Twilight was such a huge global phenomenon, because it's really uneventful and bland. There's nothing particularly offensive in it, at least not to the point that I read. It's also not badly written. The prose, the dialogue, it's all serviceable. It's fine. It has a lot more energy and life to it than the films do. But it's still incredibly bland. Nothing happens, nothing of note, nothing interesting is going on, and I had to just give up out of sheer boredom. And that took me by surprise. I thought I would at least be entertained all the way through, and I just really wasn't. Why did people go so nuts over Twilight? It's pretty boring. Something that did strike me, as someone who has seen all of the films, as very interesting, is that both Bella and Edward are more three-dimensional, more interesting, and funnier in the book than they are in the films. In the films, as far as I remember, you've just got two people who grumble at each other a lot, who sigh and get sad and frown and look moody and somber. But in this, there's a lot of sarcasm. The book leans into comedy. It's not good comedy, but at least Bella has a personality. She makes a lot of sarcastic jokes and quips. As does Edward. The picture of these two characters I had in my mind as I read was not these two actors, was not this scenario that the films put in my mind. I pictured two people who looked and behaved a lot differently to how they do in the films. And I liked the fact that there was just a little bit more life to it, a bit more colour, a little bit more vibrancy and humour. Not a lot. As I said, it's pretty boring. But it's definitely there, and it was definitely ignored in the films. However, to say that Bella Swan has a personality is a little bit of a stretch. She definitely has things that make her fun, but those things are irritating. The biggest is that she reads a lot. She is a reader. She goes and moves to this new town somewhere in Washington state, and when she gets there, she's already studied everything they're studying for some reason. She's already read every single book on the syllabus. There's a bit early on when she has to do a pop quiz about Wuthering Heights, and she already knows Wuthering Heights. She's already read it. She's read everything. But that isn't fed into her personality, and I don't think it's supposed to be seen as her being extravagantly egotistical. It's just supposed to make her established as a book-smart person. Instead, it just comes off as annoying. She's read a lot. Alright. Bully for her. It doesn't factor into her personality. Think Rory Gilmore from Gilmore Girls. That's just not the case here. Bella Swan remains relatively bland and uninteresting in spite of that, and in spite of, as I said, her sarcastic personality. But there is an upside to this, and that's, looking back, the fact that Twilight had so many people, especially young girls, in its grip, and its protagonist is someone who reads a lot. I'd like to think that hopefully this book encouraged people to read, especially classic gothic stuff like Wuthering Heights or Jane Eyre or Dracula, Frankenstein, whatever, some of my favourite books. It probably turned a lot of girls into big readers. They're already devouring these books, and then there are good books that are mentioned within it that they might go on to read as well. And Twilight probably did a lot of good in terms of literacy, just like, as much as I hate to admit it, Harry Potter did. And I'm all for that. Great. At least, I assume that's what happened. One of the biggest talking points about Twilight, especially when it was at its peak, and it's something that I kind of digested and regurgitated a lot when it was talked about, was the fact that the relationship between Bella and Edward is horribly unhealthy. But something that I noticed very early on in the book is that she mentions this. Bella is kind of self-aware. Before she even gets into a relationship with Edward, she mentions the fact that her attitude towards him and his to her is kind of unhealthy. I'm just going to read out a paragraph where she is self-aware in that way. I looked down at my book as soon as his eyes released me, trying to find my place. Cowardly as ever, I shifted my hair over my right shoulder to hide my face. I couldn't believe the rush of emotion pulsing through me, just because he'd happened to look at me for the first time in half a dozen weeks. I couldn't allow him to have this level of influence over me. It was pathetic. More than pathetic, it was unhealthy. Yeah, good. Good self-awareness, good self-advice. Well done, excellent. I know that all of that gets thrown out of the window, but she's definitely aware of it, at least at the beginning, and I was kind of proud of her for that in that moment. And perhaps that makes it even sadder given where their relationship goes and the fact that it is incredibly toxic and abusive. Even as far as I read, there's a moment where Edward says, "You should stay away from me. That doesn't mean I want you to, but you should for your own sake." And he even says something like, "I'll see you later, I'll meet you at the movies or the restaurant or whatever, but also stay away from me." That is incredibly toxic, abusive, gaslighty behavior. And I was just shocked that it was so blatant and brazen and awkward. Stay away from me. I love you, and I want to be with you, and I think you're hot, and I want to spend all my time with you, but stay away from me. For your own good, stay away. Like, I'm dizzy. I'm dizzy from that. Jesus. But as I said at the beginning, Twilight's worst sin, at least as far as I got to, is that it's really dull. The writing is serviceable. I did not cringe at any point. I've read a lot of YA books that I couldn't get through because of the cringe. Anything by Sarah J. Maas, I cannot finish. The cringe of so many books that I have tried to enjoy in a brainless, fun, laid-back way, something that I can just switch my mind off and enjoy, I can't often get through because it's so damn cringe. This isn't. There's nothing cringe in the writing. The metaphors, the descriptive language, the dialogue, it's all a bit awkward, but there's nothing cringe and painful in it. Sometimes reading a book with cringe dialogue is like watching an old episode of the UK Office. It's so cringe, it's so awkward, but not on purpose, and I cannot get through it. This? No! It's very inoffensive. Everything about it is serviceable language, serviceable plotting and pacing and character writing and dialogue writing and set design and tonal setting, etc. It's all there. And it all feels fine. But it's very bland. It's just a girl going to school, going to classes that are boring, talking to a dad who's boring, making friends who are boring, having a crush on a boy who's boring, who sits at a table with his family at lunchtime and is boring. Also, if Edward's like 11 years old, why is he in a high school? Why does he hide in a school? Couldn't he just go live in a cave or a castle like Dracula? Why does he have to hide in a high school? It must be so boring for him to just sit in a high school for no reason, where everyone's going to gossip about you and make up rumors and urban legends about you and your family because you're all creepy fucking vampires. Why does he try and hide in plain sight in a high school? A high school. Weird. And then to crush on an underage girl when he's 11 years old. It's all fucked up. But I can't really comment on that because I didn't really get that far. I just got to them chatting with each other and him saving her from that truck where, you know, the classic scene in the film where he puts his hand up and his hand dents the side of the truck and he lifts it up and blah, blah, blah. Read all that bit. But it's very uneventful. None of it's badly written, but none of it's interesting either. And I'm just shocked that this is such a big cultural phenomenon. Twilight is really boring. Nothing exciting happens. It's just so bland. It's not so bad it's good. And it's not really good either. It just exists. For a 20,000 sub celebration, I was so excited to read and tear apart Twilight, but I couldn't even get through it because I was so bored by it. Kind of annoyed. Edward and Bella, at the point that I read, are just two ordinary people full of bad quips and sarcasm, with more personality than they have in the films, less angst, less drama, a little bit more carefree, but no more interesting for that. The writing is fine, the characters, the setting, it's all just there. Everything in Twilight just exists, and I couldn't be bothered to get through it, to find all of the drama and the problematic stuff that I'm sure comes along. I read a quarter of it, 100 pages! I was so bored. I'm going to go read something more interesting. Thank you for 20,000 subs. I hope the channel keeps growing. Join my Patreon if you'd like to. My patrons are amazing people. My Patreon community is incredible, and I'm very, very grateful for their support. Don't read Twilight, but mostly just because you'll be bored. Subscribe for books.